Hello there, I'm here with my Singer SB-100, very basic vintage knitting machine, and this is number three in my kind of tutorial series because, as I've already established, the manual is terrible and I wanted to just share what I'd kind of learned from different resources and put it all in one place. Now, I'm first of all going to show you how to fix a mistake. So you can see here, I've been very silly and I have forgotten to put enough weights on, and as a result I've dropped a couple of stitches. And what I'm going to do is, with this one, I'm going to show you if it's only dropped a couple of rows down, there's just a quick way of doing it, and if it's gone a bit further down, there is another way that's a bit of a faff. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to use this tool. I tend to use the hook a lot more than the latch end, but I'm going to show you. So I'll pull the needle in a little bit, and I'm going to use my hook. I just find this easier than the latch hook. I'm sure you're supposed to use the latch hook or the other tool. Okay, I'm going to put my drop stitch on the needle, and then what you need to do is, if it's only a couple of rows, grab the first row that it's dropped, put it on the needle, and you can see here, very importantly, the original stitch is behind the latch of the needle, which is very important, and stitch number 1 that it's dropped is in front of the latch. And I'm going to pull my needle back and replace that stitch, and I'm going to do that again with the other row. I thought I put myself on Do Not Disturb, I do apologise, and pull that through, and as you can see, that's all nice and back to normal, which is great. Now this one I've gone down a few more. You can do the same thing, which I actually usually prefer to do, but if you find that you've gone down an awfully long way and you've only just noticed you've dropped a stitch, that this is the point where you should use the latch hook. So get the latch hook, make sure you have not split it, which is, some yarns obviously are more splitty than others, and you bring the latch hook. This is an absolute pain in the rear end actually. You bring the latch hook, get that, and then push it down through all the different rows that have been dropped. Use the hook to pull up the lowest row, pull that up, and effectively you're doing the same thing as with the main needle on the machine. You are knitting back up, and if you, to be honest, if you've ever knitted anything and you've repaired it with a crochet hook, you know exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just pulling it up, trying to make sure not to split the yarn, which is easier with some yarns than others, as I've said. Pull this down, get that in there, pull it up, and then I'm going to seat this stitch back on my needle. There we go. If you find that you've dropped a stitch you didn't notice for a very long time, sorry, it's quite overexposed because of the white yarn, let me just, they can see that better. If you find that you've dropped a stitch quite a long way, it's probably going to be quicker and easier for you to take the knitting off, fix it using a crochet hook or the latch hook, and then reattach the fabric to the machine. Because if you've got, say, all 160 needles in play, it's quite a pain to just simply get in, because you find that sometimes the action of knitting a drop stitch back up can cause the other stitches to come off the needle, and really it's a judgment call. Sometimes it's easy enough to knit back up using the latch hook, and this will also depend on the yarn you're using, your tension, how far along you've got in the project, how complicated it is. That with a basic machine like this, quite often the answer is going to be take it off, put it on regular knitting needles, fix the mistake, and then hook it back on, if that makes sense. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is something quite important, which is how to deal with the fact that, as you can see, there's no ribber on this, nor I don't believe that this machine is capable of having a ribber. So even if you've got one, it's no good to you here. And of course, what we rarely need when we knit is a curly edge like this. Right, so I'm going to pause this. I'm going to get a different example, and then we'll be right back with you. Okay. Right. Now, the first and most obvious solution to the fact that there is no ribber and you need to start off your knitting with something that will stop it from curling, which obviously is usually some ribbing. The most first solution is hand knit the ribbing, which I have done several times. So you hand knit it, and then you flip your stitches back on the hooks, which if you're using a lot of needles, and this is just 20, if you're using a lot, hello cat, say hi, say like and subscribe. No. This is Crouton. Adopt, don't shop. You are not helping. Thank you. I mean, I'd apologise, but I'm not going to. Right. There's that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. I will leave you to imagine what a pain it can be if you've got a lot of knitting to hook on. As you can see, so you would just hook your ribbing on here, use the comb, set it up like you normally would, make sure all the latches are open, get down, go on, do it, and hang weights, because if we don't hang weights, everything turns into a mess very quickly. And turn up to 12. That's annoying. You see, it's times like these that I think this is fun, and it's interesting to learn how to use a very basic machine like this. But also I feel like a lot of these steps are probably not necessary if you're fancy. I need to oil this. Excuse me while I just give this a good firm yank. Right, excuse me. So as you can see, hopefully you can see that fairly well, I've hooked on my ribbing, and then you just start knitting as you normally would. It is probably worthwhile doing a few tests to make sure that your gauge, your hand knitted gauge, is going to match what the machine gauge will do. Yeah, even I know it's boring and people hate it, but you know, sometimes you really do need to do gauge swatches. Okay, and this is the most obvious solution. If you want a garment with ribbing, you are going to have to do it like this by hand. Now, if you have decided, no, I've got a machine, I'm going to do everything on the machine, I'm going to show you two ways to do a mock rib or a welt. Or basically it's a hem. I don't know why they call it a welt, but it's a hem. And I'm going to pause this, hook on another example, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Right, welcome back. For you, it's been barely a second. For me, it's been about 5 minutes. What I've done is I have knitted another swatch using this trusty white yarn that I think shows up fairly well. And I want to show you how to create a welt. Now, after you've knitted a swatch, you'll see on the bottom at your cast on edge, there are these little loops, and all, which is a big all, doing some heavy lifting there, all you need to do is get these loops onto these needles and do it nice and evenly. And obviously this is not going to work, so you use the eyelet tool, the red one. Focus, focus. Right, push the eyelet tool through the loop on the bottom like so. I'm just going to turn the exposure down a little bit. Okay, so I've got the loop hooked onto my eyelet tool, and then I am going in the way I showed you before to transfer this loop onto the needle, like so. I find it better to work from alternate ends because as you hook things on, the fabric gets more and more stretched, and it becomes more and more difficult to get these little loops on. It's these ones here. Now, it does not matter too much if you don't get every single one of these on, or if you make a bit of a mess, because this is going to be the reverse side of whatever you're making. So it's basically going to be you know, between you and your conscience how tidy you want this to be. You hook it in and transfer, whoops, and transfer each stitch. Here we go. Gonna go back to this end again, get my loop, hook it on, get my loop, hook it on. And this might seem like kind of tedious, but if you want an easy life, you wouldn't have bought this basic knitting machine. It's still quicker than knitting a rib. Apologies for the interruption. Now, here we go. I've only got a few more. Go through the loop. Hook it on. Through the loop. Hook it on. Only 2 more to go. Hook that one on, and finally... Okay, I'm going to move my needles up to, as you all know by now, the working position, and just make sure both of the loops are behind the latch, otherwise you're going to have a bit of a hard time when it comes to knitting these. And get all these latches open. The latches can be a bit uncooperative because they've obviously got 2 stitches on them, but as long as your working yarn is on the right side of the latch, you shouldn't have a problem. Okay, so I'm going to lay the yarn like that. I'm going to put on my weights, like so, and then over we go. And hopefully you can see now that what you've created is a nice welt. And if I pop this off, I'm just going to pop it off. Here we go. That will be the front, and what it's going to appear to be is that you've got a hem. So the garment's hemmed, you can see it's not curling up. And this is a perfectly straightforward, pretty easy way of starting off your knitting. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to do a mock rib. So I'm going to be back in a second with a new swatch. Right, now I'm going to do basically what they call a mock rib, which in the manual it's got this insane set of diagrams that don't seem to make any sense. But what you're doing is you are knitting on every alternate needle for a while until it's double the length you want, and then you're going to add the dropped stitches. You're just going to get the loops and hook them back on the alternate empty needles in very similar to the way that you did the welt. Now you're going to need this side of your comb, and you're going to choose your victims, and you're going to push them up so they lose their stitch, and you think, ah, look at this. But it's fine, don't worry, everything will be okay. Now with the carriage you do need to decrease the tension, because you're using fewer needles. So I'm going to take the tension down. I was at 12. I'm going to take it down to like 8. 8. Because it's basically, well, it should be 6, but, you know, I'm not judging. Right, and over you go. You'll find that this can be an absolute pain, as you can see. My centre needle in particular really hates this. And there we go. And then we're going to go back and forth until we have things at the desired length. So I'm going to do that, and I will meet you in a second. Right, welcome back. Now, what I've done is, as I said, I have knitted on every alternate needle. Again, in the manual, there is just a crazy set of diagrams trying to communicate something that is, at the end of the day, pretty simple. With the empty needles, I'm going to pull them forwards, because then it's easier to hook the drop stitch back on. And you're just going to do the same thing effectively as you did before. So you can see here are my drop stitches. They're all just sitting there, these little loops. And all you need to do is take the loops and hook them back on. When you start knitting again, don't forget to return the tension to what you want it to be. Otherwise you accidentally start knitting a whole lot looser than maybe you intended. But, you know, that could be a good thing. Here we go. Here's a little hook. Aren't you glad I've only got a few here and I'm not making you watch me do this on 180 needles? That would be very dull. And, you know, it is quite dull. One thing you should definitely try to do is make sure you have really good lighting wherever you're doing your machine knitting, so that you can see what you're doing. And take it from me, even if you think that black yarn is the perfect shade for your project, you do not want to use black yarn with a machine like this, because you really do need to be able to see what you are doing. Right, send all these back, put my tension back up, get my weights, and we're going to knit a few rows. So I'll knit a few rows off camera, as it were, through movie magic, and then I'll show you what the finished result should look like. This seems to work pretty well. I haven't tried it on every single yarn that exists, but the end result, it's fine. I mean, it doesn't exactly look like ribbing, but what it does look like is, if you look at mass-produced jumpers, things like that, I have actually noticed that sometimes they have this sort of mock rib knitted in rather than real ribbing. So it's actually something that you do see in production knitwear. Okay, I'm going to pause it to do a few rows, and then I'll show you what I've done. Right. So as you can see, what you end up with when you use this method is something that kind of looks like a rib. I mean, what is actually standing in for the pearls here is the drop stitches, and it's always going to have this folded over edge. That's just how things are. I'm just going to push these needles in, because I don't need to tell you again how often it is I've ripped my finger open on these things. And this again is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Don't think, by the way, that if you knit, say, a whole scarf and you knit it on alternate needles, that it's going to be like a ribbed scarf. I'll show you. Where is it? I've done a couple of swatches on alternate needles like this. So this is on alternate needles, and you can see it still curls. It's not a way of avoiding doing a proper start to your knitting. And the only other thing I would add is that, obviously, another way that you can start off your knitting is the obvious thing, I guess, in a way, which is to pick up the stitches on your finished product. You can pick up the stitches. This is my cast off edge from the previous video. So you can, if you just think, no, I want to start knitting straight away, I don't want to faff with anything else, I just want to get it done, you can do basically an afterthought rib by picking up the stitches there, and then obviously just knitting your rib there. Another thing you can also do in the same vein is do what they call a provisional cast on, which if you knit regularly, you know what that is. Basically what you'll do is you'll do your cast on as normal, and then do a row of like a different colour yarn. A lot of people use embroidery thread. This hates embroidery thread, so I don't recommend it, but like a different colour yarn, and then start on with your desired yarn. And what you're going to end up with is, when you take the knitting off, you can then pull off the first few rows, and then what you've got is live stitches that you can then add your cast off, like your ribbing to. So that is another option. You can also do that if you're planning to graft things together, you know, like shoulders or anything like that. You can obviously do it that way with a provisional cast on. I mean, the other thing which you're probably screaming at me about right now, which I realise, is I'm picking up these stitches from a cast off edge. There is no reason why I can't simply undo the cast off edge, pick up the live stitches, and then carry on. That's obviously an option that's open to you. You can see the difference between the cast on edge and the cast off edge. Okay, so hopefully I have covered how to pick up drop stitches and how to do welt 2 different ways, how to do ribbing if you want to, 2 different ways to do that, and talked a bit about provisional cast-ons. So this is the end of session 3. In the next one, I'm going to start talking about tuck stitches, slip stitches, and talk a little bit about troubleshooting, because you may have heard this awful noise, because this needs oiling. So I'm going to talk a bit about that, like what happens when things aren't really working very well. But 9 times out of 10, the answer is either oil or weights. That's usually what the problem is with these things. Okay, so that's the end of part 3. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.